So here we're looking to specifically identify an athlete's fatigue level based on their movement pattern. Here we're going through a full day session both in the weight room and out on the football field. We've broken this session up into 10-minute intervals, with the first half being in the weight room over here, and the second half over here being out on the football field. In the weight room, our athlete was working specifically with a coach one-on-one, while as on the football field, they were running independently, running their routes. The line graph that we're looking at here is specifically looking at the anterior-posterior workload ratio, which is calculated by quantifying the stress on the quads against both the glutes and the hamstrings. So this red line that we're looking at here is representative of the total stress levels of the anterior-posterior. So it's taking the total anterior stress against the posterior stress. These two lines here are representative of the right side, which is right here, and on the left side in this darker gray down here. So what's good is obviously going to depend a little bit on what the goal of the session are and what we're shooting for. But if we think about just being from a very high macro level, we're looking to ensure that all muscle groups are receiving equal stress level. And thus, for this purpose, we can say ideally a 1-to-1 ratio would be what we would shoot for overall. So looking here at this graph, though, we can immediately see a direct correlation between movement pattern and where the athlete is relative to the day's session. So earlier on in these earlier intervals in the weight room, with the coach, we can see a much lower anterior-posterior ratio, which is suggesting that we're getting higher amounts of posterior chain activation through the prescribed movements. So as an example, I'm showing this third interval here, and we can see an average of 0.21. So that's suggesting that nearly 5 times the amount of work is coming from the posterior chain as the anterior chain. But as we move along in the day and the athlete is released on their own onto the field, we can see a dramatic shift in the movement pattern. The anterior-posterior ratio becomes significantly higher, and thus we can see that they become much more reliant on their quads as they revert to the movement pattern that the body is deeming as the path of least resistance for them. So right here in interval 6 is where they get released out onto the football field. We can see that this anterior-posterior ratio continues to climb up here. But additionally from that, we can also see that there's a dramatic imbalance occurring between both the right and the left side, where the athlete is shifting back to their more dominant side as they once again look for that easiest path to overcome a fatigue level. So for example, if you have an athlete that is very dominant on the right side, as this athlete is, what we're seeing here is as they've gone onto the field and now they're running their routes, they're reverting back to shifting some of their weight on this right side. So we can see a lot more stress coming on the right side, as opposed to the left side, whereas over here, when we were in the weight room working with a coach, it was significantly more balanced. So as a coach, we may specifically be curious to look at a contribution drop-off here to really help identify how the athlete is utilizing different muscle patterns to complete different parts of this workout that we're looking at here. So from there, we would go to a contribution chart, which I'm now showing here in kind of a bar graph format. So what we're really looking at here and what I'm focusing on is the glutes. And so the glutes are represented here in this yellow bar. These are the 4 different muscle groups that we're tracking. But what we're looking at specifically here is we can see a dramatic drop off in interval 6 once that athlete steps out onto the football field from the amount of glute contribution that they're getting. A dramatic drop off all the way to the end. We can see a lot more stress coming onto the quads. So at this point, a coach could really raise 2 different questions here. Number 1, at what point is my athlete fatiguing in this session? Or number 2, is what we're prescribing in the weight room translating out onto the field of play? So with the first question, we really may look to make some programming or practice alterations that'll allow our player more time to recover, whether that may be in between the weight room and stepping out onto the field, or even adjusting the weight room work to allow for better training and better movement patterns out onto the field. But for the second question, where we're talking about ensuring that our movement prescription is translating out onto the field, we may look to identify specific prescriptions that we're giving in the weight room. And with these heavy imbalances that we've noticed, may actually look at including more unilateral work to help correct some of these imbalances when the athlete actually steps out onto the field.